Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adopted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
This alternate universe story is written and narrated by Fantasy Reimagined. Chapter 11:14. The Wall Right South. The evening sky over Old Town had dimmed into a cold, silvery twilight as Maester Aemon's quill scratched across the parchment, his thoughts a mix of foreboding and duty. Though his hands trembled slightly with age, the lines he wrote carried the weight of centuries of loyalty, the wisdom of the citadel tempered by the harsh realities of Westeros. He dipped his quill once more, the ink pooling like a shadow at the tip, before pressing it to the parchment with deliberate care. The first letter was official, dry in tone, yet insistent in content. Reports had reached the wall of patrols lost beyond the northern snows, of men found frozen or torn by unseen forces, of strange tracks leading into lands that even the hardiest rangers dared not traverse. Jadur Mormont, the Lord Commander, was gravely ill, his strength fading with each passing day. It was a missive of caution for the small folk and northern lords alike, a factual record of the threats emerging silently from beyond the wall. Aemon's careful hand emphasized the urgency without panic, instructing that the wall maintain vigilance and readiness, but without naming the deeper, unspoken terrors that haunted the north. The second letter, private and sealed with a darker sigil of urgency, was meant solely for Lord Eddard Stark. Aemon knew the power of words, how a single line could shift loyalties, ignite fears, or protect innocence. In this private communication, he revealed the knowledge he had guarded for decades. A second copy of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen's lawful marriage, and the true birth record of Jon Snow, preserved carefully and once held in the secret archives of a loyal follower in Essos. That estate had been ransacked, the documents stolen, leaving the fate of the information uncertain, vulnerable to misuse. Aemon did not prescribe action. He did not force a path. Instead, he presented a choice shrouded in trust. Jon was to be drawn north, sent as an envoy and observer to the wall under the guise of caution and curiosity to gain knowledge, experience, and safety away from the machinations of southern claimants. Aemon's words were precise. This was sanctuary, not revelation. I will not tell him, the master wrote in his deliberate, looping script. That choice is yours, my lord. The tension in Aemon's chest was matched only by the chill in the air. Every moment that Jon remained unguarded in the south, exposed to whispers of ambition and political gambits, heightened the risk of his parentage being discovered. Stannis would wield the knowledge as legal authority. Rosalie could obliterate any claim to justice with rumor and power. The Maester's years had taught him that even truth could become a weapon in the hands of the reckless. Prudence, therefore, was the shield he offered. He paused, letting the quill hover over the parchment as he considered the weight of the task. Jon Snow, young and untested beyond the experience of war, could not be told his lineage yet. The boy's mind was sharp, his instincts honed in conflict, but the truths of his blood carried danger, political, personal, existential. Aemon's letters were not only a call to action, but a strategic seed, planting the notion of the wall as refuge and opportunity, far from the prying eyes and ambitions of the southern realms. The letter contained subtle instructions as well. Jon was to meet with selected men of the Night's Watch, chosen for loyalty and wisdom, to observe, learn, and report. He was to interact with the survivors of the northern patrols, to understand the unforgiving landscape, and to see firsthand the peril that had already claimed too many. These were not orders of recruitment, but invitations to knowledge and preparation, a slow shaping of the boy's mind for challenges unseen. Aemon wrote with care, ensuring that each line could serve multiple purposes: caution, guidance, concealment, and encouragement. The wall was to be a crucible, a place where Jon could grow, learn, and witness the complexities of leadership, strategy, and survival, without ever being aware of the lineage that had made him a hidden heir to the Targaryen legacy. The evening deepened in a sharp northern frost. Candles flickered in the chamber, shadows stretching across the walls, lined with ancient tomes and scrolls. The Maester's aged eyes traced the final lines of the letters once more, sealing each with careful precision. One for the Lords of the North and the Wall, detailing the threats and losses in the frozen expanse beyond. One for Ned Stark, private and potent with knowledge, urging him to send Jon to safety and growth, while maintaining secrecy. In his heart, Aemon understood the gravity of what he had set in motion. The letters would travel, carried by trusted messengers through snow, storm, and shadow, into the hands of those who would shape the boy's path. Every decision, every encoded line, was a stitch in the delicate fabric of destiny. A safety net for a child whose existence, if revealed too soon, could unravel the precarious balance of the realm. As he finished, Aemon's thoughts lingered on the boy's potential, on the wisdom Jon might gather under the unforgiving northern skies, on the encounters with loyal men, with dangerous lands, with the truths of human nature and governance. He did not know what Jon would make of the wall, nor how he would grow, only that he must go, and that his journey must remain shielded from those who would corrupt it. Finally, the Maester rose, folding the letters with methodical care. He entrusted the official one to the runners of the wall, and the private one to a loyal Stark envoy, aware that the future rested in the hands of men who could carry words without twisting them. As the candle guttered, throwing a final warm glow across the cold chamber, Aemon whispered to no one, save the stars visible through the tower window. May he see, learn, and survive. May the North guide him as wisely as the hand that protects him unseen. In the darkness beyond the wall, a new chapter was poised to begin. Jon Snow, unaware of the truths of his blood, was being gently steered into a crucible of cold knowledge and strategy. There, amid frost and the whispers of ancient magic, he would find not only survival, but the seeds of the mind that would shape the North, and perhaps the realms beyond. Aemon's hands, old yet steady, had set the wheel in motion, quiet, deliberate, and irrevocable. The letters bore the promise of safety, secrecy, and preparation. They would ensure that the boy known as Jon Snow walked toward the wall, guided by necessity, unseen by ambition, untested yet destined for significance. In the silent night, the Maester's fear became action, and action became destiny. Chapter 11:15, Ned's Old Fear. The Hall of Winterfell was quiet, empty of the day's bustle. But in the shadows of the high windows, Ned Stark's thoughts roamed far beyond the stone walls and torches. The evening wind whispered through the towers, stirring the banners and carrying the faint scent of snow that would blanket the north come morning. He stood, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the maps of his lands spread across the oaken table, but his mind was elsewhere, on a boy whose fate now rested, in part, upon his own judgment. Ned's memory drifted back years to a stormier, more tragic time. The face of Rhaegar Targaryen, calm and deliberate even amid turmoil, pressed itself into Ned's mind. He remembered Lyanna's final request, whispered in desperation and trust. A plea to safeguard her child, the seed of her love and her sorrow. That memory, long buried beneath the weight of war and duty, had returned to him with a force that tightened his chest. This was not merely a boy, Ned realized. This was a bridge between past oaths and future consequences. A living promise that carried the weight of kings and the blood of Targaryens and Starks alike. He considered the dangers. Stannis Baratheon, unbending in law and righteousness, would see the child's true heritage as both leverage and claim. Runfleet, with his charm and political cunning, might attempt to manipulate perception, molding allegiances around a boy who, to them, was an unknown threat. Even the quiet nobles of the North, loyal as they might appear, could falter under rumor or fear. Secrecy, Ned knew, had kept the boy safe thus far. But secrecy alone would not suffice in the shifting landscape of power that now stretched from Winterfell to the Iron Throne. Ned thought of Jon, unaware of the magnitude of the truth carried in his veins, unaware of the eyes of history watching him. The boy had grown stronger, wiser, and sharper than most. But still, he was young. He did not need to carry the burden of legacy yet. He needed protection, guidance, and understanding. And Ned knew that only by sending Jon north to the Wall could he secure those elements. The Wall was more than stone and ice. It was a crucible, a place of learning and restraint, a theater where a young mind could be tempered without the interference of southern ambitions or courtly schemes. There Jon could observe, act, and grow without the world's claws upon him. Ned did not make this decision lightly. He paced slowly, boots echoing against the stone floor, the weight of his own honor pressing heavily. The boy's safety would not come from secrecy alone. It would come from structure, witnesses, and the legitimacy of being escorted under Stark protection. Ned considered the men he could trust. those loyal enough to act without faltering, skilled enough to navigate the dangers both human and elemental beyond the wall. Every detail mattered. The selection of guards, the path northward, the orders to those who would carry Jon safely to Castle Black. This was strategy as much as duty, necessity fused with forethought. And yet, he would not tell Jon the truth. That revelation was not for now. Not while the world below was rife with intrigue. Not while the Southern Lords plotted and measured every step of the North's resurgence. Jon must move with knowledge of responsibility, but without the crushing weight of lineage. That truth would come in time, when the boy was ready to bear it, when it could guide him rather than endanger him. Ned's hand rested briefly on the table, over a small wooden chest containing mementos of Lyanna, a token of promise, a secret held close to his heart. These objects, like the boy, were symbols of hope and peril intertwined. The cold wind from the battlements brushed through the hall, and Ned exhaled slowly, the sound mingling with the creaking of the banners overhead. He felt the familiar tension return, the cautious, simmering dread that had haunted him since the rebellion, and the death of Robert's enemies. He feared not only for the boy, but for the stability of the North, for the fragile threads that held loyalty, honor, and fear in balance. A single misstep could unravel decades of careful planning. And Ned Stark, for all his experience, understood that even the most deliberate hand could falter when the stakes were this high. He considered how the Northern Lords would react, the old ones in particular. Some would question Jon's place. Some would murmur about legitimacy. Others would see only opportunity. Yet he knew the wall's authority was unique. It was a neutral ground in many respects, a proving place where allegiances were earned, not assumed, and where young men and women could learn the ways of the North, of governance, and of survival in ways no Southern hall could offer. Sending Jon there would not only shield him from Stannis and Renly's ambitions, but would cultivate in him the patience, judgment, and strategic foresight he would need for the trials to come. Ned's mind lingered on the old oaths he had sworn, the promises made to a dying sister, and the quiet trust of a friend lost to time. The decision weighed heavy because it was not merely about safety. It was about shaping the boy's mind without telling him he was being shaped, about offering freedom under the guise of choice, about teaching without lecturing, guiding without revealing. It was a delicate balance, one only Ned could maintain. He glanced at the fading light through the windows, watching as the shadows stretched across the hall. The North outside was calm, deceptively serene, masking the currents of ambition, fear, and resentment that flowed beneath its surface. This calm, Ned understood, could not last indefinitely, but it could be used deliberately as a shield. He would act now decisively, with all care and subtlety, and in doing so, he would hold the North and Jon's future in careful balance. Finally, Ned Stark turned from the maps, the letters, and the hall, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He knew that Jon's path was set not by prophecy or courtly ambition, but by the careful, deliberate hand of those who loved him. For now, that meant sending him north, providing guards, witnesses, and guidance, all while keeping the ultimate truth. His lineage, his parentage, hidden until the moment was right. It was a responsibility he bore alone, a weight he would carry silently, knowing that the boy's future depended on the precision of his choices. As he prepared the orders, gathering trusted men to accompany Jon to the wall, Ned Stark felt the old fear return. Not for his own life, but for the fragility of what he had promised to protect. The world was a dangerous place, ambition unchecked and loyalty fragile, but he would face it as he had always faced challenges, with honor, with foresight, and with unwavering determination. Jon Snow would go north, and under the shadow of the wall, the boy would learn, grow, and prepare for the weight of the North, and perhaps the world that lay ahead. Ned's final thought as he sealed the instructions was quiet, deliberate, and resolute. The boy's truth would wait, but his safety and guidance would not. Chapter 11:16. The envoy named Snow. The air of Winterfell that morning carried a chill that bit through leather and wool alike, though the sun had begun its slow crawl above the distant hills. Jon stood in the quiet of the courtyard, boots pressed into frost-hardened earth, eyes sweeping over the banners that danced lazily from the battlements. The North was calm, deceptively so, but Jon felt none of the relief others seemed to take in stride. Victory had come, yes, but it had left him in possession of influence rather than clarity. And now there was a new responsibility pressing upon him, a mission that he could neither ignore nor reshape to suit his own ambitions. Maester Aemon's letters had arrived days prior, delivered with a care that spoke to their importance. The first had been straightforward, reports of patrol losses beyond the wall, men missing in snowstorms and shadowed forests, and the failing health of the Lord Commander. The second, private and folded in layers of secrecy, contained instructions from one who understood the dangers yet did not dictate Jon's future. The words were tempered, careful, but insistent. The wall needed coordination, the North's authority must be present, and the boy who bore the Stark name, though unknown to all as anything more, was expected to go. Jon had read and reread the letters in silence, the parchment growing soft beneath his fingertips. He could have refused, of course. He could have claimed necessity here, duty there, anything that would let him remain in the lands he knew, among the men who trusted him, and under the banners of his house. But practicality, the kind that often appeared cold, even in warmth, guided him. Defense required eyes. Intelligence demanded presence. Stability called for a hand, firm yet impartial. It was not glory he sought, nor was it vengeance or crown. This was a duty of the mind and body, and Jon accepted it without ceremony. In the days that followed, his preparations were deliberate and measured. He reviewed the reports from his northern commanders, noting patrol routes, known threats, and intelligence gaps. Maps were spread across tables in the quiet of Winterfell's war room, torches flickering against the stone as if to mark the passage of hours. Jon traced his finger along the icy expanses beyond the wall, imagining the patrols that had disappeared, the men lost to frost and unknown dangers. There was no drama in his work, no fanfare, only a methodical acknowledgement that things must be seen, recorded, and understood. The North had been fractured, its lords impatient, its soldiers weary, yet he now carried a responsibility that required foresight beyond any battlefield. He consulted with Ned Stark, whose presence was both a shield and a compass. Ned spoke little, measured every word, but his judgment was clear. Jon must not be led astray by the allure of title, the temptation of influence, or the whisper of bloodlines. The boy had to be guided, not molded. Jon, in turn, asked questions, tested assumptions, and noted observations. He was not given a mission in ceremony or heralded with expectation. Instead, it arrived as a quiet, potent weight, and he bore it as he had borne other burdens, with patience and precision. The departure itself was unremarkable to outsiders, a simple arrangement of trusted men, provisions, and necessary weapons. Jon did not ride in a column of knights, nor under banners proclaiming his coming. He moved with practicality, with a small retinue of men sworn to secrecy and efficiency. Every step was deliberate, each mile measured against intelligence and terrain. He was not an envoy bearing the threat of war or the promise of kingship. He was a presence meant to stabilize, to observe, and to coordinate. The distinction mattered more than anyone could know. As the North faded behind him, the snow-laden hills giving way to forests and ice, Jon's thoughts were quiet but relentless. He considered the men he would meet, those stationed at the wall and beyond, and the fragile nature of authority in lands governed by cold isolation and the constant threat of death. Commanders had died, patrols had vanished, and rumors of unnatural occurrences had begun to circulate. Here, in this frozen expanse, Jon would need more than skill with blade or strategy. He would need judgment, patience, and the capacity to weigh incomplete information against imminent risk. He thought of his companions, the friends who had been steady through fire and shadow, and the allies he had yet to meet, those whose loyalty was untested, and above all he considered the idea of choice. This mission, though shaped by necessity, was his to accept freely. There was no coercion, no forced exile, only a quiet insistence from those who had seen the need long before Jon could fully grasp it. He understood the difference. Destiny was not being thrust upon him. Duty, however, could be embraced, measured, and executed. The wall, looming like a jagged tooth against the horizon, became the axis of his attention. Each mile northward tightened the sense of purpose, the air growing colder, more brittle. Jon thought of the patrols he would coordinate, the intelligence he would gather, the decisions he would make in shadowed halls far from the sunlight of Winterfell. He imagined the men and women who had served before, the sacrifices made silently, and the challenges that awaited. He knew that the North's authority was fragile and that his presence could both stabilize and provoke, depending on his choices. For the first time in months, Jon allowed himself to contemplate the lessons unlearned. The battles won without full understanding of the human consequences, the councils held without consensus, and the fragile peace that hung on the edge of perception. He realized that this mission, though seemingly straightforward, would test him in ways war never had. Here, in the shadow of stone and ice, decisions could not be measured by banners captured or fields held. They would be measured by the survival of men, the flow of information, and the subtleties of trust earned and observed. The journey continued, and Jon's mind sharpened with each passing league. He considered logistics, patrol rotations, the temperament of officers, and the morale of soldiers. Each element had weight, each choice could cascade into consequence. He did not fear failure in the same way a young man might, nor did he crave recognition. Instead, he cultivated a readiness, an awareness that authority in such lands demanded constant attention and discipline. He was an envoy, not of kingship, but of balance, a moving presence intended to prevent chaos rather than enforce power. Night fell as they approached the fringes of the wall, and the first real sight of the colossal fortifications etched against the stars drew a cold awe even from Jon's practical mind. Torches burned faintly along the parapets, shadows twisting against stone, and the wind whispered across the battlements with an unearthly moan. Here was a place where legends and reality coexisted, where decisions could have immediate and profound consequences. The weight of responsibility settled heavier than any armor he had worn, heavier than the steel of any sword. Jon dismounted, feeling the chill of the walls seep into his bones, and he noticed the soldiers and stewards moving silently, efficiently, their eyes wary yet disciplined. He understood instinctively that command here required more subtlety than any battlefield maneuver. Influence, respect, and observation were tools just as vital as any blade. His choice to come as an envoy, to act deliberately, not as a lord claiming dominion, but as a presence of stability, became clearer in purpose with every step. He allowed himself a single moment to look north, beyond the wall, at the barren, snow-strewn expanse where patrols had been lost and rumors of shadowed dangers whispered. This was the frontier, he would learn, the crucible that would forge his understanding of leadership beyond banners and battle cries. The men stationed here, the patrols, the scouts, these were his charges now. And for the first time, Jon felt the weight of authority that could not be declared, only earned. Inside the gates, he was greeted with measured eyes and restrained acknowledgement. Word of Jon Snow's arrival had traveled ahead, but nothing had been dramatized. There was no ceremony, no public proclamation, only the quiet recognition of someone who carried responsibility without ostentation. Jon felt the gravity of that silent acknowledgement more than any acclamation he had ever received. Here his reputation mattered, but so did his actions, in ways that would be immediate and unforgiving. As he settled into quarters assigned for him, Jon unpacked little more than his cloak, his sword, and the maps he would use to track patrols and intelligence reports. Each document, each report, was a fragment of understanding, a piece of the larger puzzle he had come to observe and influence. He considered the men who would serve under him, the officers and scouts whose loyalty would be tested not by allegiance to a crown, but by discipline and prudence. The wall was a theater of subtle power, and Jon recognized that his role, while not regal, was crucial. Evening deepened, the stars over the wall stark against the black sky, and Jon allowed himself a moment to reflect on the choice that had led him here. This was not exile, nor was it penance. It was a mission, deliberate and necessary. He would observe, coordinate, and influence, not for glory, not for claim, but for the practical stability of the North and the balance of power beyond the wall. And though the wind cut sharply through the stone corridors, he felt a quiet resolve settle over him. His path was his own, defined not by proclamation, but by action. Jon Snow had crossed into a new chapter, one where his mind would be tested, where observation and patience mattered more than strength, and where every decision, even unseen, could shift the balance of the North. He was not a king, nor a general, nor a hero declared by banners. He was an envoy, a presence, and for now that was enough. Here, in the silence and shadow of the wall, he began to understand the difference between controlling wars and controlling the future, between command and influence, between being a figurehead and being a force, quietly shaping the world. And he embraced it fully, without fanfare, without expectation. Because this, above all else, was his choice. Chapter 11:17, The North watches him leave. The morning air in Winterfell carried a brittle sharpness that bit at fingers and faces alike. Snow still clung stubbornly to the battlements and the roofs of the outer walls, and the smoke from hearths mingled with the rising sun in thin, gray ribbons. The northern lords assembled in the courtyard, their cloaks drawn tight against the chill, eyes narrowed in observation. Jon's departure was not announced with trumpets, nor heralded with ceremony. It was a quiet affair, deliberate in its execution. Yet every eye present tried to read meaning into each measured step he took, each rider who followed him toward the distant forests and open plains. Some of the older lords exchanged glances that spoke of suspicion more than loyalty. "A bastard leaves at the height of power," one whispered, voice low enough for only his neighbor to hear. "What does it mean if he must go beyond our lands to act?" His companion, a man whose furs were trimmed with the sigil of a house that had seen winters uncounted, shook his head slowly. "Perhaps strategy, perhaps fear," he murmured. Both eyes darted toward the figure of Ned Stark, who watched silently from the shadows of the hall, a hand resting lightly on the pommel of a sword that needed no unshithing. The North had long recognized Ned as the keeper of wisdom, and his silence in that moment was itself a statement, not approval, not opposition, but patience, and the acknowledgement that the world was wider than their lands. Riders gathered the horses quietly, saddles adjusted, reins checked, and Jon moved among them with an even hand. He gave brief instructions, confirmed rotes, and offered no grand speech. To some, this looked like humility. To others, it felt like abandonment. Yet the truth lay somewhere in between, known only to the men who bore the weight of the wall's fragile authority, and to Jon himself. Each horse's hoof struck the frozen ground with a rhythm that seemed almost to echo in the lords' minds, carrying away not only a person but a statement whose meaning would take days, weeks, perhaps months to fully understand. Within the ranks of the northern leadership, a subtle interpretation battle began immediately. Younger bannermen, those who had risen in the war's wake, whispered cautiously among themselves. "He sends himself into danger," one said, voice tight with anticipation. "Perhaps he hopes to expand influence in the north and beyond, using the wall as a stage." Another, older and more weathered, spat lightly onto the frost. "Or perhaps he fears our scrutiny. The bastard may have won battles, but he cannot escape judgment in our halls." Each theory carried a kernel of truth, yet none could fully comprehend Jon's intent. Observation, patience, and the cold logic of the North had taught them all that what was not seen often weighed heavier than what was. The ladies and stewards moved about the courtyard quietly, tending to horses, adjusting furs, ensuring the small retinue of riders had provisions. They whispered of loyalty, of honor, and of the strange weight of power in these times. Their words traveled quickly, each comment feeding into the subtle web of interpretation that stretched through Winterfell like frost through stone. "He goes to serve the realm, they say," a young woman murmured to her companion. "But what realm, and whose command?" The questions themselves were a kind of battle fought silently in the minds of those who had no direct voice in Jon's decision. Even the small folk gathered to watch were aware of something shifting, though they could not place it. Children clung to the skirts of their mothers, soldiers stood at attention, and the wind carried the sound of leather and iron across the courtyard. Every motion of Jon's departure became a story in miniature. The angle of his cloak, the set of his shoulders, the careful way he mounted, and the deliberate timing of his departure. In the North, meaning was never given lightly, and every gesture became a statement, intentional or not. Ned remained a central figure in the courtyard, though he said nothing. His presence alone stilled the murmurs that threatened to grow too bold. He did not chastise nor praise, for he understood that interpretation could be more dangerous than direct confrontation. Silence, he knew, could be weapon and shield alike. Those who sought to see weakness would search for it in the absence of words, and those who respected authority would note the calm endurance of the man who had guided the North through blood and strife. The lords noticed his stillness, and slowly, unease softened into a measured patience. As Jon's retinue moved toward the edge of the courtyard, the snow glittering beneath the rising sun, some lords began to discuss logistics quietly among themselves. "Who will maintain oversight of patrols?" one asked. "Who speaks for Winterfell if the envoy is absent?" Their questions were practical, not treacherous, but they carried an undercurrent of concern. a recognition that Jon's departure shifted responsibility in ways visible yet unspoken. Their voices, careful and measured, rose only enough to be heard by those close, but the words traveled through the ranks with subtle amplification, like frost spreading over frozen ground. The northern banners, heavy with the frost of early morning, seemed to stand taller in the wind as Jon's figure receded. Each sigil, each house, began to register the departure differently, some as a calculated expansion of influence, others as a moment of vulnerability to exploit. Whispers moved like smoke, curling through corridors and alleyways, resting briefly on lips before being carried onward. "He's sending himself away," repeated a voice, low and uncertain. But for what purpose, and to what gain? These questions hung in the crisp air, unanswered, yet potent. As Jon crossed the first ridge that led toward the forest, the view of Winterfell shrinking behind him offered a physical metaphor for the political landscape. From this distance, the intricate games, the subtle rivalries, and the hidden ambitions became less tangible, but no less real. He had chosen a path not of escape, but of initiative. Yet the perception of others now began to take form, twisting his purpose into shapes that suited their needs. The North watched, always watching, interpreting, and weighing each act. By midday, the retinue had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving the courtyard to return to its measured quiet. The lords reconvened briefly, speaking in subdued tones, eyes occasionally lifting to the battlements or the gates. The mood was neither celebratory nor mournful. It was recognition of a shift, subtle and powerful. Ned finally allowed a nod, not to the departure itself, but to the acknowledgement that the North would endure regardless of perception. His silence had become policy, a strategic restraint that signaled both strength and trust in Jon's judgment. The snow that had fallen during the morning was beginning to soften under the tentative warmth of the sun, and yet the chill remained in the bones of those gathered. It mirrored the political climate, a North outwardly calm, yet internally stirred, each lord weighing motives, alliances, and the potential for change. Even as Jon moved beyond the sight of Winterfell, the echoes of his departure carried with them lessons yet to be learned, alliances yet to solidify, and challenges yet to emerge. By evening, the courtyard was emptied of lords and small folk alike, the only movement that of stewards ensuring daily routines continued uninterrupted. In private chambers, discussions continued in hushed voices. Was Jon's departure a strategic maneuver? A test? A retreat? Each interpretation carried weight, though none could fully discern his intent. And as the cold wind whispered along the stone walls, Ned remained, the unspoken arbiter, letting silence be the language of authority. The northern lords had witnessed Jon depart, but they had not witnessed his intent. That knowledge remained his alone. As shadows lengthened across the courtyards and battlements, the quiet realization settled among them. Actions could be interpreted in many ways, but authority was as much about perception as execution. The North watched him leave, and in watching, it began to define its own response. Not with words shouted nor banners raised, but with the subtle discipline that had always marked the land. And so, Winterfell exhaled. The air crisp, the snow shifting lightly with the evening wind. The North would wait, measure, and observe, its power quietly undisturbed but politically alert. The whispers and interpretations would grow, but the true weight of Jon's choice, the purpose behind his mission, remained unseen, deliberate, and entirely his own. For now, silence had become policy, and in that silence, the North both judged and endured. Chapter 11:18, The Wall That Waits. The wall rose before Jon like a frozen memory of ages past. Its stones pale in the weak sunlight, frost clinging to every edge, every ledge. The air was sharp, biting at exposed skin, carrying the scent of salt and ice from the distant seas, and a hush seemed to hang over the structure, as if the wind itself dared not speak. No banners fluttered, no trumpets heralded arrivals, only the crunch of boots against snow and the soft jingle of harnesses broke the profound stillness. Jon slowed as he approached the gates, eyes tracing the sheer height and permanence of the wall. It was older than kings and battles, older than the wars he had fought and won. Discipline marked every movement of the men about the courtyard. Straight backs, careful steps, eyes alert. But there was no ambition in their gait, no pursuit of glory. They moved not for power, but because they had learned necessity. Duty was their master, and silence their shield. He felt it immediately. A presence in the quiet, something beyond the ordinary vigilance of men. Not enemy, not friend, but a watchful patience that seemed woven into the stones themselves. the air itself. It reminded him that here the world was different, that power and ambition had little purchase against time and the cold. The men stationed at the gate acknowledged him with a nod, formal but without ceremony. Jon dismounted, drawing the reins close, feeling the weight of his choices settle onto his shoulders. This was no audience, no court, no hall filled with whispers and glances. Here, the wall demanded only attention, patience, and respect. As he walked through the main gate, the sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by the distant drip of melting ice and the soft moan of wind through stone corridors. Each step carried a weight he had not expected. The wall itself seemed to measure him, assessing his resolve, weighing his purpose. He realized quickly that the men who served here would not be impressed by his victories, nor swayed by his lineage. Only actions mattered, only endurance, only the quiet mastery of self and duty. In the shadow of the immense fortification, Jon allowed himself a moment to breathe. The cold pressed against his lungs, filling him with a clarity he had not felt amidst the noise of politics and war. He was small here, yet seen alone, yet part of something older and larger than any council, any throne. The wall waited, patient, silent, eternal. And for the first time in months, Jon felt the stark truth. Leadership sometimes meant stepping away, learning, watching, and understanding before action. No announcements would mark his arrival. No lords would cheer. Only the wall, cold and indifferent, waited. And in its shadow, Jon understood that here, the world's judgment moved slowly, measured not by whispers, but by endurance, and that he would need every ounce of patience to meet it. Chapter 11:19, The Fat Boy with the Books. The library of Castle Black smelled of old parchment and iron, a mixture that Samwell Tarley had come to recognize as both home and safety. The air was dry, carrying the faint tang of soot from the hearth, where Maester Aemon sat quietly, poring over scrolls thicker than Sam could lift in one hand. Outside, the wind lashed against the wall with an impatient persistence, shaking loose snow from the battlements and rattling the wooden shutters. It was the wall's way of reminding everyone that it did not bend to wishes or sentiment. Sam moved carefully through the aisles of low shelves, his boots scuffing softly against the stone floor. He had been given the title of Maester's assistant not as a reward, but as a reprieve. A chance to live rather than die under training he could not physically endure. The kind-hearted Maester had taken him in, recognizing a mind eager to learn and a heart that feared nothing more than failure. Sam had learned to carry scrolls, deliver messages, and care for the Ravenry, all tasks that allowed him to grow without risking life and limb in the freezing, punishing cold. When Jon entered the hall, Sam's head lifted instantly. Recognition flared in his chest like a sudden spark. Jon, who had been absent from Winterfell for so long, stood in the shadow of the wall, tall and solid, his eyes scanning the library before resting on Sam. For a moment, the years and battles and council halls melted away. Sam did not kneel. There was no need. The bond of shared history, of survival and trust, needed no ritual. "Jon," Sam said softly, stepping forward with careful purpose. His hands, still slightly calloused from moving supplies and tending ravens, brushed against a stack of scrolls as he adjusted them. "I thought I might not see you here." Jon's expression softened, a faint relief crossing his features. "I'm glad you're safe, Sam," he said, voice carrying the quiet authority he now possessed. He noticed the books, the careful order of scrolls and notes, and the tiny labels in neat, cramped script. "And useful," he added, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He remembered when back he helped Captain Mormont retrieve robbed supplies and captured the robbers. Sam was with Captain's guards as he was one of men responsible for taking care of supplies when they were being transferred, keeping the fresh ones humid and saving others from being dropped. So when the caravan was looted, Sam escaped to report. He was very fragile and unable to fight, very coward. But his mind worked well, a reason Jon became friends with him back then. Sam's lips twitched with a mixture of pride and nervousness. I try, he admitted. He moved closer to a table stacked with parchment and quills. "Maester Aemon keeps me busy. Ravens, letters, old histories. I know things, I can find things." He hesitated, glancing up at Jon. "If you need intelligence, or even just a record, I can help." Jon's eyes scanned the room, then rested again on Sam. In that instant, the wall felt less forbidding. The wind outside no longer seemed to press against the stone so harshly. Here, in this quiet hall of knowledge, Jon had a friend, a resource, Someone who understood the weight of observation and information. Good, Jon said, his voice low but firm. We'll need it. Things are shifting. Reports, rumors, everything counts. Sam nodded, adjusting his glasses and picking up a scroll carefully as if it contained not just ink, but the essence of the wall itself. I can keep track, he said. I will. You don't have to ask twice. Jon let the words settle. He did not need grand gestures. The wall demanded practicality, patience, and attention. Sam's presence was a reminder of both. Here was someone who could see patterns, who could survive in ways that brute force could not, and who would watch Jon's back while Jon faced the storms ahead. Outside, the wall groaned under the weight of ice and wind, a reminder that danger existed in every shadow. Inside, the library remained warm and quiet, a fragile haven where knowledge and loyalty intertwined. Sam, the fat boy who had once stumbled and feared even the cold, now stood steady and capable, his mind alive with information and possibilities. Jon felt a rare moment of certainty. In this boy, he had an ally who would endure, who would observe, and who would understand the significance of every message, every raven, every recorded detail. The wall waited beyond the windows, harsh and silent. But in this quiet hall, Jon and Sam shared a bond forged by survival, trust, and the understanding that knowledge could be as sharp a weapon as any blade. And Sam, for the first time in years, felt the pride of being useful, not as a soldier, but as a keeper of the stories, the intelligence, and the fragile threads of what might come next. Chapter 120. The Commander's Decline. The chill in the air was sharper than Jon remembered, cutting through layers of furs and mail as he entered the courtyard of Castle Black. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step echoing faintly against the high walls that seemed to absorb sound. Inside, the wall loomed, silent and unyielding, the weight of centuries pressing against every stone. He caught sight of Jaehaerys Mormont before the commander had even risen from the chair that had become his throne of infirmity. Jaehaerys' frame had grown frail, shoulders bent not only by age but by illness, yet the keen intelligence in his gray eyes was undimmed. Jon approached cautiously, aware of the gravity of this encounter. He had first met Mormont months ago, when the wall had seemed a distant shadow in his life. He remembered the moment the commander had handed him Longclaw, the old sword resting heavy in Jon's hands, a gift born not out of obligation but trust. Jon had helped recover the stolen supplies from some thieves who thought the wall an easy target, and in return Jaehaerys had chosen him, a boy of uncertain birth, to bear the blade. There is no one else I trust with this, the commander had said, voice firm yet tinged with hope, eyes scanning Jon's carefully measured face. That memory alone anchored Jon here now, reminding him that trust, once earned, could withstand distance, danger, and time. Jaehaerys' cough rattled through the hall as he gestured for Jon to sit. You've grown, he said, voice rasping but steady. More than the wall could have expected, more than I could have hoped. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a blanket over his lap, but his gaze never wavered. The patrols beyond the wall. His words faltered, weighted with the gravity of his news. We've lost men. Scouts have vanished. Bodies found, not as they should be. Something moves beyond our borders, and it does not heed our walls. Jon listened intently, every instinct on alert. He had faced enemies before, had led men into battle, yet the sense of something ancient and patient pressing from beyond this frozen barrier was unlike anything he had encountered. Jaehaerys spoke with precision, recounting sightings, disappearances, and the unnerving oddities noted by the few survivors who returned. Every account was careful, measured, and yet carried an urgency that Jon could not ignore. I trust you, Jaehaerys said finally, eyes locking with Jon's. It was neither command nor request. It was acknowledgement. The weight of that trust was heavier than any sword, yet Jon felt it settle naturally upon him. Observe, Jaehaerys continued, his voice firmer now. Do not command, do not act without need. Learn. Watch. Understand what the wall has always understood. Jon nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the words. He had spent months building strategies, commanding armies, and navigating political storms. Here, at the edge of the known world, power was measured differently, by patience, by perception, by endurance. He understood that his role was not to lead yet, but to perceive, to absorb the lessons that the wall offered. The commander's illness had weakened his body, but not his mind. He spoke of past patrols, of mistakes made, and of luck preserved. Each sentence layered with meaning. For the attentive listener, he shared cautionary advice, hints of experience distilled into short phrases, all underscoring a philosophy that Jon had never fully appreciated. Survival here depended on knowledge as much as strength, and foresight as much as courage. Jon could feel the gravity of the wall settling over him, the sense of being watched not just by men, but by the stones themselves. The history embedded in every frozen battlement, he realized, as he listened to Geo recount details of missing scouts and bodies found in strange circumstances, that the wall was both guardian and judge. It demanded patience, demanded respect, and it would allow nothing to be rushed. Not even the ambition of a young lord accustomed to the tides of battle. As the conversation drew to a close, Jackshire leaned back, weary but resolute. "You will have eyes," he said, "and ears. Use them wisely. The wall has endured for centuries because it remembers what men forget. Watch, learn, and do not falter when others panic." Jon left the room with the weight of those words pressing against his shoulders, Longclaw feeling heavier than ever, not for its steel, but for the trust it represented. The wall awaited him with patient silence, and Jon understood that here, every decision was measured, every observation carried consequences. For the first time in months, he felt both small and necessary, a student in a place where lessons were eternal and patience the only true weapon. Chapter 21. What died beyond the trees? The Rangers returned in staggered groups, gaunt and silent, the cold of the far north etched deep into their faces. Their cloaks were frosted stiff, leather and fur crusted with ice, boots stiff from frozen paths, and their eyes carried a weight that no man could ignore. They spoke in fragments at first, each word measured, clipped, as though the act of recounting had to be balanced against the memory's danger. Jon listened, standing just outside the mess hall, the wall looming behind him, stark and silent against the pale winter sky. "They were different," said one ranger, his hands shaking slightly despite the furs wrapped around his arms. Shapes moving in the trees did not bleed. Not like men. His voice was quiet but precise, each syllable deliberate. Jon caught the subtle way his eyes flicked to the snow-covered horizon, as if expecting the shadows themselves to rise and claim him. He knew this was no exaggeration. These men were trained to survive, not to panic, and yet their faces betrayed a tension that could not be faked. Another ranger added, "The cold, it's not just the wind or snow. It bites inside. Makes your head ache. Makes your heart pause." He swallowed, exhaling frost into the air. "We lost 5. Not in combat, not to blades, to silence, to the dark that moved like it had its own mind." His words fell like stones, each one thudding against Jon's chest. The recounting was sparse, almost ritualistic, as if saying too much could awaken the thing itself. A third ranger, younger, more hesitant, described movement in the woods, shapes slipping between trees too fast to follow, their presence felt rather than seen. "They're not men, not animals, not anything we know. They walk like the wind, but carry the weight of something older." Jon's hands tightened around Longclaw's hilt, though he did not raise it. The wall had trained him to respond. But this was beyond training. Observation, patience, thought were all he could wield here. None of them named the creatures, no White Walkers, no others. Their testimony did not give names, because names imply knowledge, and knowledge implies mastery. What they described was beyond mastery, phenomena that existed at the edge of comprehension, silent and indifferent to fear, methodical yet alien. The danger was implicit, creeping into every careful word, every hesitation, every glance toward the shadowed forest. Jon's mind raced, cataloging each detail. The unnatural cold, the shapes that did not bleed, the subtle terror that did not panic. He realized the weight of responsibility pressing on him would not be measured in armies or bannermen. Here, the danger did not wait for banners or laws. It waited beyond the trees, patient, deliberate, and silent. As the rangers fell silent, each lost in memory, Jon kept his eyes on the horizon, the wall rising behind him like a sentinel against the unknown. He said nothing, not yet, because there was no need. The message had been clear without embellishment. What waits beyond the trees is unlike anything they have faced before, and the North would demand more than courage alone to survive. Chapter 22, The Heirlooms. The Hall of Maesters was quiet, heavy with the scent of parchment, soot, and candle wax that had seen decades of quiet study. Outside, the wall's massive shadow stretched over the courtyard, snow drifting lazily in the bitter air. Jon stood in the center of the chamber, furs gathered around his shoulders, eyes adjusting to the dim glow of lanterns. Maester Aemon, seated at a low wooden desk, looked up with a frailty that belied a sharpness capable of seeing the threads of the world unraveling. "Jon," Aemon said, his voice soft but deliberate, "what I have for you is not instruction, nor is it a weapon of the moment. It is precaution, legacy, responsibility." He gestured to a small table beside him, where an iron-wrapped chest rested, sealed with a wax emblem unfamiliar to Jon, yet somehow resonant with the weight of history. Beside it lay a blade unlike any Jon had seen. The steel seemed almost liquid, black with faint ripples of silver running through it, Valyrian in appearance but not named, its very shape whispering of otherworldly patience. "This blade," Jon began, reaching instinctively, but Aemon raised a frail hand, stopping him. "Not to be drawn, except in circumstances beyond the ordinary. Circumstances where the line between life and calamity is no longer human to define. You are not to show it, not even in jest, not even to those you trust. It exists, and yet it does not. Remember that its history is better forgotten than known, unless you must act." Jon blinked, confusion sharpening in his mind. "But why me? Why now?" Aberon's eyes softened, a mixture of kindness and weighty foresight shining through. "Because, Jon, someone long ago believed in futures. Some who never lived to see them, and yet they trusted certain hands to carry forward. These gifts are from those hands. They ask nothing of you now, but care. And one day, perhaps, understanding." He nodded toward the sealed chest. "That chest carries no instructions. Open it only when necessity demands. Do not tamper. Do not inquire. Consider it a letter in silence. A message for time and truth, not for curiosity." Jon lowered his hand, the cold metal of the hilt of Longclaw beneath his fingers offering some reassurance. But the new blade called to a strange part of his mind, a curiosity tempered by the gravity in Aemron's voice. He felt the pulse of history, thick in the air, pressing against the present like ice against skin. I understand, I think," Jon said carefully. Aemon nodded, though his expression did not change. "Understanding is not knowing. You will have to live in the space between. A gift is sometimes heavier than a command, and sometimes lighter than hope. Treat these artifacts as you would a life not yet yours, for that is what they are. A life waiting to be born, waiting to act when the world demands it." Jon's gaze shifted from the blade to the chest. Sealed, heavy, silent. It did not call to him the way swords or treasures normally did. It felt almost patient, like it knew it would be touched only when the moment came, and until then it could wait. The room felt colder in its presence, the quiet of the wall pressing against Jon's thoughts, drawing a cautious line between him and the destiny he did not yet understand. "Will someone explain what this is for?" Jon asked, more out of habit than expectation. Aemon shook his head. "No, some lessons are meant to be carried without words. Some truths arrive only when the hands and heart are ready. You will hold these, not because you seek power, but because power may one day seek you, and then you will remember this moment." Jon nodded again, though he did not fully comprehend. Yet, even in the dim lantern light, he felt a strange alignment, a tether between past and future, a weight and a promise pressed gently into his palms. He understood, instinctively, that the blade was a guardian, the chest a story, and Aemon's trust a bridge over time. "I will keep them safe," Jon said softly, almost as if speaking aloud might shatter the balance. Aemon's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "That is all I ask. Safe unseen, and ready for the moment that must come. And remember, what is unseen carries its own authority." The chamber settled into silence. The crackle of the hearth and the distant howl of wind across the wall were the only sounds. Jon's hands rested lightly on the hilt of the unnamed blade. His mind was restless, but calm. Confusion lingered, yes, but it was tempered by an odd sense of purpose. Legacy, unseen but enduring, had chosen him for its bearer. And for the first time, he understood that some gifts were not meant to be opened, but simply carried, quietly, patiently, awaiting a world ready to call them forth. Jon left the chamber carefully, the chest left untouched, the blade sheathed at his side. Outside, the wall stretched white and unbroken, and the wind seemed to whisper promises and warnings alike. In that silence, Jon felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders, not as a crown, nor as a command, but as a responsibility, one that he could not yet define, but one he would hold regardless.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.